All right, we are live. Welcome to the Trax Freight Market Report. We are doing a look back at all of the March data. I'm super excited to be sharing this time today with Bea and Blake Tablac. I'm gonna let you guys introduce yourselves just for any new viewers who are in the mix for the first time, but excited to dive in. Obviously, a lot happened this past month. Also, a lot didn't happen. So it'll be an interesting time to kind of look at some of the trends, some of the norms, some of the things that we're projecting into the future. So Steve, you want to kick us off with an intro, and then we'll hear from Blake, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, sure. Actually, Blake, why don't you go? You're a guest, so I'm honored to have you on with us today. So go ahead and start us off.
So much pressure. I appreciate you, Steve. First of all, yeah, great to be here. When you say a lot happened, I mean, it's an understatement of the decade. When I first arrived almost 3 years ago, probably within a month of getting here, we started thinking about what were going to be some of our product, sort of pillars, like how are we going to develop product? And one of them just said volatility. And it was this assumption that the world will constantly be in a state of flux and change, and it'll constantly be volatile. And the minute you think you've sort of made it, like, oh, we got through that, somebody else is going to show up and do something else, like, invade Iran and shut down the Strait of Hormuz. So the reality is this is just the life that we chose to live. And I think it's amazing, and I think it's wonderful. And I don't love some of the sort of negative aspects of what goes on in the world, but the reality is for us, what we do, if you're in logistics, like, congratulations, you've entered one of the most dynamic environments the world's ever known and will ever know. And so you will never be bored for the rest of your lives. If you're in university and you're listening to this, congratulations. Great business to be in. You're never going to be bored. There's always something that's going to be going on. So yeah, it's been pretty wild. I was actually even reflecting on the last year. Gold skyrocketing to $5,000 an ounce. You get silver approaching 90. Crazy commodity prices fluctuating all over the places. You've got this huge influx with tariffs, and everybody's sort of moving things to different places. And then all of a sudden it really died down, and then now started to pick back up again. It doesn't matter what you think, that you're through. You're about to enter something else. And I think it's wonderful. I think it's fantastic. It's terrifying. It's all the wonderful things that you want to have in a life well lived. So yeah, it's been fun.
Well, it's been a joy working with you, Blake. You bring a lot of great insight into the market, into the product for Trax. So it's been fun going along the journey with you. Well, I always like to say it's never a dull moment. My job as Executive Vice President of Customer Engagement Advisory is it certainly picks up when things are difficult in the market, because a lot of what I do is visit with our key customers along with Blake and try to help them navigate through some of these situations and disruptions, maximizing the utilization of data, of course, but also in terms of strategy. So I've been busy lately. I've had several customer calls related to fuel, for instance. And so today we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's never a dull moment. And certainly when things are in a calm state is the time you want to prepare for when they're not. And so pretty much guarantee that volatility is here to stay. And it gives us something to talk about, Joy.
Right?
Yeah, that's true. It won't be a boring conversation.
No.
So we always, just so everybody's aware, we do these every month to kind of do a recap of the data that we got out of a whole bunch of different sources put together by, Steve isn't the expert reviewer, but it's called the Trax Freight Market Report. It's something that you can subscribe to and get in your inbox every month. It's a fantastic coverage of really everything that's in the LMI, everything that is, has all kind of the relevance of people who are making big decisions for the supply chain, both, kind of the macroeconomics, global dynamics, all the geopolitical things, et cetera. Yeah. So we're going to dive into just a few of the components of that we got to in the last month. So definitely make sure that you subscribe so that you get the holistic view of everything that went on. But, Steve, you led with fuel, and I think that's a very good place to start because it's obviously something that's top of mind for many people. So kind of walk us through where we're at. We're seeing, obviously, there's a huge external influence on fuel prices right now, but it's a very interesting dynamic. So maybe give us a little bit of a tutorial, right? You're our whiteboard guy. Give us a little bit of an education on how we need to be viewing this and how it's going to be affecting some of the decisions we're making.
Yeah, sure. And this comes from being in a procurement role or supporting procurement for many, many years. And fuel is always it's an important and significant aspect of transportation costs. So if you think about the total cost of transportation, there's your base rate, your fuel, and typically, and this is all modes of transport. No mode of transport is immune of the impact of fuel. And then you have your surcharges or accessorials, and they all make up a percentage of the total cost per shipment or cost per unit weight. So the key is understanding how those break out. Now, fuel is the least controllable of those in terms of execution, right? In other words, they're based on external factors. So what we're seeing, obviously, in the market is, and by the way, this doesn't make any sense to me, but I can't change it. But the global commodity of energy is traded on a future type methodology, meaning the fuel you already bought, you already paid for, has nothing to do with the current cost of fuel, because it's based on a future sort of prediction of availability. So fuel is up dramatically, and so there's really two elements in the room, and we'll talk about the other one here in a minute. But let's start with fuel. I think the other one is the really interesting capacity and pricing impact of transportation to the LMI metrics that we look at. But yeah, this graph is really good. So you could see that things were kind of going along nice and steady. People had contracts in place, shippers, and they weren't really worried about fuel. So one of the things that is interesting about fuel is there are mitigating strategies that create some sort of buffering effect based on averages and based on how your contract's written in terms of range tables that use to buffer peaks and troughs within that graph you're showing. Well, you can see over a pretty significant amount of time, there weren't many peaks and troughs in that graph, pretty steady. So if you had a contract in place and you thought you did a really good job of just averaging fuel over a time period like 4 weeks off the DOE index, which is what you're showing, or you use some sort of scaling effect to mitigate peaks and troughs in your contract, you probably were in good shape. But now the wake-up call comes. And so the duration of this increase will heavily impact both of those because, by the way, averages only work for a short period of time, right? And an average helps you when it's going up and it hurts you when it's going down, by the way. That's to note. But nothing's going to help you if the trend line is continuously going in one direction for a long period of time. So there are alternative fuel strategies in place, like Breakthrough is one that isn't based on an index, but most contracts are honestly still based on an index. And what that means is it will adjust according to the index value. And what you're showing there is a classic index for the United States for almost all modes of transport that are serviced in the United States, and a lot of other references to the US DOE is in place. And that's a floating index. So fuel becomes relative to that index, okay? Whether it's directly off the DOE or whether it's influenced by a carrier-specific index or whatever the case, they're all being based on this one index. So it's really hard to mitigate given the duration of time that these events play out. Now, we don't know the end play here yet, but we do know that it's persisted now for several weeks, right? I don't know exactly the time, but it's at least been 4 or 5, 6 weeks. So the fuel aspect is the least controllable. If we had a way to predict fuel, we'd all be wealthy and investing in the market. Probably wouldn't be here talking, but nobody really knows. So the best thing you can do is prepare, one, for these kind of events in terms of your fuel strategy and mitigation. And the second is really having the data to understand what's your best approach to mitigating that impact of a fuel change that looks like the right side of that graph that we're experiencing today. And so if the question is, how should I think about duration of time, the longer this issue persists, the more impact it will have on total cost. And now you start getting into, and we'll talk about this in a minute, you get into the already elevated prices that were in place coming into this impact. So to me, the elephant in the room in this, in the total LMI thinking about transportation cost, if you look at the aggregate cost, it's going up, but it's heavily influenced by two things: fuel and transportation pricing and capacity. And if you're dealing with anything else, you're not dealing with the problem. Those two things are going to be the major impacts, at least for the foreseeable future, in terms of total transportation cost at an aggregate level. And I'm talking all modes of transport. Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Well said. Good explanation. Blake, one of the things that we wanted to direct towards you is the idea that, okay, so fuel spiked this fast. It kind of created this unplanned cost shock across all these different industries, all these moving products. What's the right posture for business leaders who are trying to protect margins, who are trying to plan for Q2 and Q3? We don't have a clear resolution timeline. So, I mean, you're a CEO. What's the right posture to take, the right messaging?
I just looked at a great group of other CEOs. It was one of our investors did an offsite for all the portfolio CEOs. And one of the things we all universally agreed to is that as a CEO, you don't have the luxury of being like, yeah, I got through that. There's always something going on that you need to be planning for and something you need to be looking at. The nice part is they all follow patterns. Now, a couple of years ago, I was in a meeting with a very large automotive manufacturer, and we were talking, and one of their very senior executives was in there and made a comment that the CFO had asked him, how do I reduce costs across logistics? And he said, ship fewer cars, okay? Or ship fewer parts. And immediately I thought to myself, man, that was the wrong answer. And I'm not kidding. It was 6 weeks later, he was fired and there was a new executive there. Okay. It was wild. I actually saw it firsthand. This idea that the data that I would need in order to make some decisions doesn't exist. And so realistically, if you want me to lower the cost to ship less stuff, I was like, man, that's tough. Now, good news, most of the logistics executives that I work with, they don't say that. That's not an answer that they give. But what you notice is that there are always patterns to these things. Okay? Geopolitical instability will close down a shipping lane. Okay? It happened last year. I don't know, was that like 8 months ago? It feels like 2 years ago with the Red Sea, right? These things happen. And so you really have to be thinking through them ahead of time. The good news is there's so many solutions out there today, including like we have our own natural language query where you can start looking through data and start asking what if questions and start analyzing things. I also use Claude. We have an enterprise license to Claude. I actually will download data and push it in Claude and start looking at different trends and patterns. Really good example, fuel prices surged. One of the things you should be looking at as a logistics leader is, am I paying too much to ship things? Meaning from one location to the next, what's the average time in transit? Let's say it's 2 days if you ship ground, but you're shipping a bunch of stuff 2-day air or 2-day whatever. Why? It costs more and it takes the same amount of time to get there. Start analyzing things and start changing the way you're shipping things. It's a great way to reduce costs while fuel prices go up. If you've got a ton of product, it's got to make it to market because that's how you generate revenue. It's a hot product and you got to get it there. Maybe you don't care as much about price. And so what you need to start analyzing is who's the most effective at getting this thing to market. Who are my carriers that have the lowest rejection rates? Like you want to know that stuff right off the top of your head. And with the solutions that exist out there today, it's not just possible. You should expect it of yourself. And I think it's one of the reasons I love the age that we're in today. There's a lot of paranoia around AI. Everybody's going to lose their job. Before we got on, we were talking about this, and I've been talking about this with other executives. There's a real split. I actually don't think everybody's going to lose their jobs. I think there's a lot of people whose jobs are going to change materially, and I think some jobs will reduce. I think coding is a really good example. The life of a programmer is going to change. If you have a computer science degree, you're leaving college right now, it's a very different job than what it was 10 years ago. You're more of an orchestrator at this point, but you have an opportunity to do something incredible. You know, if you think about sort of what I have had to deal with as an executive and what other executives have to deal with, you picture a funnel and lay it on its side. And the big end is demand. It's innovation, it's ideas, it's whatever. The thin part is constriction, and that's knowledge work. That's like programmers and database analysts and database engineers and you name it, designers, what have you. That used to be the constriction point. That's gone. That's absolutely gone at this point. And so if you're an executive leader, all those ideas you had, you can do them now. You can absolutely start engaging in some of those ideas. And I don't care what role you're in. I mean, as the CEO, I'm constantly looking at volumes report. I'll load them into, various private LLMs that we built internally, start analyzing trends and see what's going on. So I can go talk to our executives and say, by the way, did you know, now that the price of fuel is up, here's many lanes that you're running that you don't need to be running the way you're running them. Here's service levels you don't need to apply. Here are picking processes that what would appear to be picking processes that maybe are inefficient for the work that you're doing. you have so many more opportunities now than you ever did before. The constriction used to be data science. I was at a company called Koros, and we had this like chief data science officer, and it was really hard to get their time. I don't need them anymore. I'm not kidding. I literally just this morning took a massive 30 megabit Excel file, loaded it in Claude, and started interrogating it, and got some really interesting insights. I'm going to meet with an executive in a couple of days. And it's wild what you can do. I historically would have had to call 3 people and figure out who had time. They're like, I'm working on customer stuff. I don't have time for this right now. Like, I don't need that anymore. Right. And so I think if you're running a logistics operation today and you're not uber familiar with these solutions, you don't understand how to use the data, or the data that you're hoping for isn't there with your current provider, get rid of them, bring a new one in. Like, you've got to find a way to instantly respond to these things. And there's so many ways to do it. You want to maintain margin? Like I said, start analyzing service levels and see which ones you need and which ones you don't. Go look at your picking processes. Maybe you've got multiple millions of dollars worth of labor locked up in distribution centers that you don't need. There's a million different ways to think about trimming costs, but overall, it's cost, quality, speed, emissions, and at different times, you're turning different dials to get different results, right? And without the information and without knowing how to interrogate it, you're a loss. You will be like that executive that said you want to lower your cost, ship less stuff, and by the way, you'll find yourself on the outside of the door looking in, not on the inside of the door looking out. Right. So I think it's an
totally
incredible.
agree, Blake. I like that. I like that example too, because a lot of times this is pretty fundamental in transportation logistics, but you don't you measure cost by looking at your network by looking at the cost per shipment or cost per unit weight by mode. It's not the volume. You want to ship stuff because that means you're making money, but how you do it changes the KPIs like cost per shipment and cost per unit weight. So if the financial, the CFO is saying, what's the impact to fuel increases? Well, it's a portion of that KPI. You can explain the total impact. It all takes data. The answer is you can optimize around some of these things by looking at those KPIs and looking at the variables that play into, as Blake mentioned, into that KPI, which is using the right carrier, using the right service, optimizing the distance you ship, which influences fuel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it really is. But, I made this comment last time. Sometimes the math is harder, but you have to do the math and you have to have the data to do it, to make a really well-educated decision and not be fired out the door because you gave a wrong answer. Yeah. Which is not ship less.
I would say the other thing in really dynamic times, and this is really interesting. So I'm in a group of CEOs the other day, and I heard 3 of them say this same sentence, but slightly different. At one point, I spoke to my spouse and I said, it's either going to work or I'm going to get fired. Okay? I heard that multiple times from multiple CEOs, meaning they had to make a risky decision. Yeah. So when we got into our small group, I asked a couple of these people. Okay? I asked this one woman, I said, but when you made the decision, okay, how did you think about the risk? And she gave me great math. She said, there's data, there's experience, and the remainder is risk. And the reality is if I have more data and I have some experience with the problem, it turns out the unknown is much smaller. It feels bigger because unknown always feels bigger. Yeah. Okay? But the unknown, it turns out, is meaningfully smaller. And once you learn to recognize that, you'll take risk. The other thing I would say is in turbulent times, you have to take risks. You have to. And as a logistics operator, I know it's hard because our job is to get things from A to B and don't screw that up. Okay. But the reality is you have to start walking out on the short branches. You really have to push yourself to go find new and creative ways to serve the business. And again, cost, quality, speed, emissions. Start working with the business leaders. Which one are you optimizing for? And by the way, what you told me on Monday may change by Thursday. And so you got to stay on top of that. What are you trying to optimize for? And you better have some answers. And the great part is there's a ton of answers out there, and there's not that many patterns to go look at, right? Like once you understand how things work, there's just a handful of patterns you're looking for. And you can have these great conversations. And that for me is when you go try something and you take a little bit of risk, but again, you have really great data to support it. You've got some good experience behind it. There's some unknown. Your returns are outsized. They're meaningfully outsized to what your competitors or what your peers would be doing. Because people who won't take risks and are just constantly trying to move things from A to B, costs start to balloon, they get caught off guard. Like there's all kinds of problems that happen. But man, you start taking just a few risks here and there what you will find is your returns will be wildly outsized. Yeah, so I think right now, like I said, it's an amazing time to be alive. I mean, if you are right now on planet Earth and you are in logistics, congratulations. You literally won the lottery. It's going to be the most fun you've ever had for the next however long you decide to keep this career.
Yeah, it's interesting how challenges really create opportunities, and as long as we learn and how to adapt and improve, right?
Yeah. 100%.
So one of the challenges is kind of the second elephant in the room, Steve, that you already alluded to, which is the capacity crunch, right? So we're seeing kind of carrier consolidation, we're seeing transportation capacity. So the transportation capacity index was 39.2. It's the lowest it's been since September 2021. The transportation pricing index was at 89.4, which was up 12.7 points in a single month. So we're just seeing kind of this spread happen between pricing and capacity. So the question, I guess, is if we see this carrier consolidation story build, we see the data accelerating that. What does that consolidated carrier landscape mean? What does the capacity crunch mean? Do we foresee it lasting? I'm just interested to know your perspective as you look at this data and how it's playing out.
Yeah. I'll comment, and then I'll let Blake chime in with his commentary. So if you look at the LMI as a source, for instance, you notice that it's an 8-point compilation and derivation of an index value, ultimately called the LMI. If you look at it has to do with warehousing, inventory, and other sort of cost components of the supply chain. If you look at all the graphs, they're pretty consistent in terms of influence, except for transportation right now. So you see the LMI is up there starting the beginning of the year, and at I think the average is like 61.5. So you're above average, but the real story behind the increase is transportation. So again, what I'm just simply saying is, it's not a warehousing problem. It's not an inventory issue. It is definitely transportation. And if you look at, do you happen to have a graph on the transportation, Joy?
Yep.
It's almost precipitous. It's almost crazy in the way it looks, right? In terms of impact.
Transportation
but it's a major influence on that. So so look at that graph. I mean, it doesn't, you could be very visually impaired and still glean something from this graph. So like I always say, is it a blip or is it a trend? Obviously this is a trend. If you look at the pricing, it's the opposite, right? It's going up, and that's supply and demand. So we saw this coming into 25, right? Carriers weren't investing in equipment. They were being sort of burdened with margin challenges and trying to consolidate and navigate through coming out of the freight recession. That sort of whittled down the capacity too, right? Some people just got out. And so now we have, and this typically ebbs and flows, by the way. So eventually a carrier is not going to wants to meet the demand of the market. So they naturally ebb and flow. They self-correct over time. But this is a pretty significant impact right now, and it's on top of the fact that fuel, right, is gone up significantly. So it's a tough time if you're negotiating, because now do you negotiate for the short term, hoping that this self-corrects in the long term, or will higher prices in the market lower demand and it all levels out? I don't know exactly what's going to happen here. I'm a half full person. I don't think we're going to go into any sort of recession or anything. So I think demand will sustain, but this will have to eventually correct. You have to meet the demand of the market. But right now it's tough because obviously we don't have the capacity in the transportation arena to meet it. And this was a problem building last year and sort of exposed itself late December. And now we see it persisting here into 26 and gotten worse, right? Blake, that's kind of what the market looks like. I don't know if you want to make
No, listen, it's another great use case for understanding data and being able to rapidly sort of consolidate it. So again, cost, quality, speed, emissions, right? If you were to look at that chart, one of the things you really want to know is the rejection rate is going to climb because capacity is lowering. And so who are the carriers that have had really high quality for me over the last 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, and I want to start signing contracts with them where I'm guaranteeing certain amounts to ensure my rejection rates stay low. You don't need to do it with everybody, right? There's going to be some that are not great, that their quality index is quite low, right? Their speed index is quite low. You're not going to want to have guaranteed with them, right? You're not going to want to pay extra for a really bad service. But the ones that are, the ones you've been working with for a long time, they understand your business, they're in the right places at the right times, and time in transit's low, and all the things that you want, right? Like, those are the people that start going and negotiating with them. And the reality is these things generally don't whipsaw back in a month. We've seen a bit of whipsawing happening, but not over a month. In fact, if you pull that chart up, it's really interesting. It definitely moves in a wave. And this has been, this one's been coming on as you go back and look for, sort of steadily now, 9 months, something like that, right? Yeah, you got capacity. It looks like, again, for 9 months, it's been trending in that direction. And so to Steve's point, it will balance itself out, but it sure doesn't look like it's going to balance itself out over the next month.
No.
It's not going to happen even in the next 2 months, maybe even 3. And if it did, we're in a depression, not a recession. I mean, it's literally something has happened to cause the world to come to a complete halt. And let's hope that doesn't happen. So, black swan events, can't really plan for those, but man, this looks like a trend. And, one of the things I want to do is double down on quality, right? Quality and throughput's always the measure of any manufacturing process, any distribution process, anything you do, right? Quality and throughput. So, man, if I could measure out all the carriers that I use and maybe even find some that I didn't know that run these same routes and have a high quality index score, like that would be great. That'd be fantastic versus just relying on brokerage and 3PL and things like that. Like, I want my own data set and I want to go make my own decisions. So I think, again, historically, what I just said to you would take 6 months. And by the time I got the information, this trend line went back in the opposite direction and I didn't need it anymore. The reality is right now, I could probably figure that out in the next hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. Yeah. Like there's no reason not to know this information, right off the top of your head. So I think like I said, it's an amazing time to be alive. It's also an amazing time to be a leader. And if you're not using these solutions, if you're not using these tools that are readily available to you, you're missing out. And you're probably not going to last long, if I'm honest, because somebody else is going to show up and have a better idea and a better input on it. So
that's good commentary, Blake. I'll just add a couple points. I've been watching the inventory, coming into 26 after the tariff situation where we saw bloated inventories, everybody's running a bit leaner now on the inventory side, which is helpful, right? So, remember, you kind of like your balance of service, service related to transit and how to control costs. In the overall supply chain, you've got that inventory component, warehousing and transportation balance. We saw it get a little bit out of whack with the tariff situation where there was overstocks and then a bleed out of that inventory over time, which increased carrying cost in inventory. Well, everybody's running somewhat lean now. Now, what's going to be interesting is if your transportation becomes a very high cost component of the overall cost, you may change your inventory strategy to mitigate some of those costs by either stocking more or consolidating loads and shipping less frequently. So back to Blake's point, you have to know all your levers and you have to have the data to know which lever to pull. And you probably have to make a few calls, risks, fill in the blank, whatever you want to call it. Yep. I only know so much. And yeah, it's possible this could all change, but I agree with Blake. It's not going to come back in a month.
And I'll add to that. You think logistics costs are high? Try stock out.
Yeah, exactly.
You think it's expensive to move something from A to B? Just wait till you don't have it.
You don't have it. Yeah. Then you're losing to your competitor, and because they have it, right?
I had a very real experience. I got a new truck this weekend or last weekend, and not because I wanted to. I liked my old dirty truck, but it just, the engine light kept coming on, and so I was like, I got a new one. But I still like working on my own vehicles. Like, I really enjoy it. And so I went online and a year and a half ago, whatever part I needed, I would just click on it, get it. It was here in 2 days. Okay. A bunch of people were stocked out. I ended up buying something that was like my second choice versus my first choice because it was going to take me 4 weeks to get the part in. And I'm like, man, that was expensive. And how many people just made that decision? So again, like, if I understood time in transit, how long it was going to take to get from, my contract manufacturer to me, again, if I needed to really lower my logistics costs, I could start moving it slower, but I need to build up some inventory before I can do that. Yeah. Right now I can start shifting. And again, like, answering that question, that used to take months to get to that level of information. Yeah. I just sat down with the CEO of NetStock, and this is what they do, like the inventory management, right? And he and I were talking about cross-pollinating, like, some different data workflows. And so we just did some experimenting while we were sitting in the room. Two CEOs, two complete morons. Okay? Let's just be clear. When it comes to data science, we are not the rocket doctors in the room. And we were able to actually combine data sets and make some use of them and go, that's really interesting. Your stock levels would need to be about here before switching logistics providers to move to a slower lane in order to make up for that cost here. So, but those things, I mean, it's two knuckleheads sitting in a room who know nothing about data science, okay, but are just curious, grab two data sets, put them in together into a private cloud environment and made some assumptions and bam, you had an answer. I mean, those are the kinds of things that, like, today, if you're a logistics leader, you can and you should be doing them. And man, what a career arc that could be. You go from being the guy that gets yelled at to being the guy that is like, we gotta call her. Like, she's the one who knows how to do this. Like, every time we have a question, she's got the answer. Like, you have that chance to be that person now. And so yeah, it's wild. And I think the level of information is available. I think it's fantastic.
Blake, I'll tell a true story. I can only tell you this because I got a few gray hairs, but about 15 years ago, I was asked to do an analysis on a data set to understand why costs were going up for a customer. And it took about 3 weeks to do that assessment, compiling data in Excel and doing everything manually. They wanted it done again on the 4th week on a monthly basis. So wait a second, it takes 3 weeks to come up with the answer by the time you get the answer. Yeah. The burden to come up with the answer was so great that you couldn't do it. Mm-mm. So back to your point, well, that burden has been removed. And especially with AI is really good at looking at different data sets and pattern matching. It's really good at that. Okay. Yeah. And you remove that burden. Now you improve the frequency and the burden. You can improve the frequency. You should be looking at these things every few days, every week to adjust accordingly, as you said. So I think it's fascinating. I love it because it removes the burden that no one wanted to do and puts the real emphasis on the decision making and making the call that you have to make, which again, you don't ever have all the answer, but you use your experience to fill in the gaps and you make the call. But if you can do that more often, you're more apt to be able to adjust in sooner and quicker and proactively around the event. So I think it's an excellent point, and it's a great time to be around because a lot of those burdens that existed 15 years ago are no longer there. Yeah, it's great.
Agreed. Amazing. So I kind of want to close out. I know obviously there's a lot of additional data and people may be curious about more points on that, in which case I would say subscribe and download the full report. You'll get all of the data and that will be a fantastic resource for you. But I want to kind of finish out with the importance of the data asset. So, it sounds like that is the key, right? So, Blake, I even wrote down what you said. I thought it was so good. The idea of like data plus experience, the remainder is risk. Like that's so brilliant. And that, but the purity of the data asset, the reliability of the data asset, you can put two data sets in Claude and what you do with them and what you get out of them maybe depends on the value that they had to begin with, right? So I know that's a problem that we solve at Trax, right? And it's a huge part of our mission. So talk to me a little bit about that, about the importance of that, about our approach to it, and then kind of how our technology does solve for that.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to do two things. One, our technology solves a part of that. Okay, there's a part of it we don't. And if you're an executive, you need to understand this construct because it will matter to you for the next generation of workers. And it's something that if you were in data science, you understood. So the first thing is understanding what actually happened is what we do. I can tell you exactly what happened. And not what was supposed to happen, which is in the TMS, not what I think happened, which could be anecdotal, and but what actually took place. And what was the thing that took place? Okay, now with that data, you can do all kinds of creative things. You can do anomaly detection, you can do trend analysis. There's all kinds of great things that you can do. You can analyze the amount of time it takes an object to get from A to B, and then the service level, like we were talking to. Instantaneously, you can decide whether that 2-day service is worth it, like right then. You can look at the number of same packages going from point to point, like same size, and start to assess, do I have a picking problem at my distribution center? Like this data is available to you instantaneously. Okay? That's in our system. That's what we do. Now, if you're an executive, you want to be careful, okay? Because what's in my system, I'm a system of work, and I have your actions. What you don't want to do is start taking other systems of work and pushing that data in. Okay? Now, the data that we take in from other areas would be like TMS data. That's perfect. Load that in because now we get a record of what was supposed to take place. Now you can cross compare. But let's say you wanted to figure out, and I had this question the other day, okay? Certain customers are more expensive than others in this certain manufacturing industry. Okay? If you're out in the middle of nowhere, you're up in Alaska, you may be more expensive to serve than a customer in, say, South Dakota, and even more expensive than a customer in Chicago. And so the question is in our contract, should we start having some level of surcharge for where you're located? Because we got to get the stuff there. Okay? Well, that's CRM data. Do not push CRM data into a system of work. Okay? You've spent millions, if you're a large enterprise, hundreds of millions on data lakes and BI tools. That's where they belong. Okay. And you need to get really smart about what you're pushing into those and really quick. And it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take rocket science, by the way, to figure this stuff out. You don't need to call a data science expert. Just start thinking through in your mind, what information would I need to know? And where do I think that information lives as the sort of system of record? Client name, location, different distribution points they might have, et cetera. That's all located there. Okay. All your distribution centers, I got that. I know all the rates, I know all the places you ship. That's great. But if I wanted to understand that, I got to put those two data sets together. The right place to do it is in a data lake, and the right way to analyze it is through a BI solution or through something like Claude. Because now you're combining multiple data sets. So from our perspective, we spent gazillions of hours and dollars normalizing logistics data so that you can have the right to interrogate it. And we continue to do this all the time. In fact, every new release of an LLM, or every new release of an ML solution, anything like that, we're constantly evolving and adapting to make the data quality higher and higher and higher. We will always do that. That is part and parcel to what we do. As an executive, though, many of the answers you're going to need are going to come from different systems. Okay? And you got to understand how to merge that data together. And again, this is no longer a data science problem. This isn't. This is literally any executive. Again, myself and another knucklehead got together and we figured out how to do it. Okay, so if I can do it, certainly somebody else can. Okay, certainly if you're in logistics, you're way more analytic than I am. I guarantee you can do this. So those are the two constructs. One, understand the system you're looking at. Like in our case, we're a system of work, so the information is going to be accurate at the minute that you pull it. Okay, that's what it's going to be. Now it may change. 2 hours from now, you're doing 30 million packages a year. Guess what? Like 2 hours from now, I closed a bunch of things out, et cetera. And so that data set may look slightly different. Now you start merging those data sets together. Man, you can forecast quickly.
Oh, Blake, you hit mute. Well, I might have to wrap up for Blake.
Yeah. No, but I like that. I mean, I think it's valuable intel, and the idea that putting multiple data sets together and knowing what to look at, what not to look at, what to isolate, all that is absolutely a skill that maybe has not been historically in the executive toolkit, but one that is vitally important nowadays to make data actionable, because that's the key. It's like, we have all the data, now what?
Right. Well, and just to wrap Blake's point, I call this the operationalization, if that's a word. I get to make it up. Data is only useful when it's in the hands of the people making the decisions, and it becomes integrated into their work breakdown structure itself and how they operate.
Yeah. So,
and that could be an executive, that could be a director of transportation, it could be somebody in procurement, right, in the different functional areas. So the key is to have those areas aligned. And how do you get people aligned? Data. You share a common goal with a KPI, and everyone contributes to meeting that objective, and they don't fight each other, because, classic example in that is you can have different things negatively influence the outcome of a KPI, like a cost per. If procurement doesn't do the right thing, if the logistics folks don't route and use the proper strategy to execute, if the merchandisers and a retailer don't plan and forecast inventory properly, that's going to have negative impacts to the overall cost, because then you're going to be merging using a lot of last minute expedited moves to support a customer. So it's really that usage within the enterprise that makes a difference, whether it's exec or down to a low level manager. But I don't see how you can survive in today's world without it, honestly.
Agreed. Sorry, I lost the microphone there for a second.
There's Blake's back. So sorry, Blake. I just wanted to wrap up for you there.
No, that was great intel. All right. Well, this was a fantastic session, guys. I appreciate all the insights and lots of good nuggets there. So we'll definitely be redistributing it and, making sure that we promote it across all the different channels so lots of people get to do rewatches of it. I think there's lots of good insights to glean. Any final thoughts or anything we didn't get to that you guys wanted to cover? Awesome.
No, other than keep your eyes on the data and the market, because what is it, 416 today? I can guarantee you it will change. So it's we're in that sort of level of volatility right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is Blake's favorite. So
great time to be alive.
Blake's happy.
That's it. Yeah.
Volatility with a capital V. We love it. Exactly. Awesome. All right. Well, appreciate you guys so much. We'll talk soon.
Definitely.
Thanks, Joy. Thanks, Blake.
Bye.
Bye.